I'm at GenreCon in beautiful Livonia, Michigan, and we're going to catch up with one of our favorite authors, Tobias Buckell. He's been on the show numerous times, but we haven't had the opportunity to catch up with Tobias in about 2 years, so he's going to have a lot of new stuff to tell us. Really looking forward to that. We had an opportunity a couple of months ago to catch up with Sherry Priest, and she's going to tell us about her new novel, so it's going to be a great show. So stay tuned for more Cult Pop. With me now is Tobias Buckell, one of my all-time favorite guests on Cult Pop. He's always been accommodating, coming out to any convention, any place we're at, giving us the time to talk about his wonderful novels. Today's no exception. We're talking today about Hurricane Fever. Tobias, I'm so happy to see you again. Sincere words. You've always been a great guest. My fans love you when you're on the show. You're a great interview, so thanks so much for being back on today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's always a pleasure. I'm very, very excited to be back.
It's been about 18 months since we last had the opportunity to talk, maybe even closer to 2 years. And so a lot's been going on, but let's jump right into your newest novel, which is a techno thriller, Hurricane Fever. Why don't you tell the folks at home a little bit about that?
You know, with Hurricane Fever, I was, riffing off of some of the stuff I started in a novel called Arctic Rising, which is a look at the near future after global warming has kind of continued to melt the polar ice caps. People have adapted and are dealing with heavy weather and resource depletion and just trying to accommodate it, trying to chart a realistic path through these scenarios. There's this great site and group that the Navy puts together called Task Force Climate Change, and they do a lot of original research. Actually, the military in general in the US does amazing research, and they release a lot of it out into the public. And so reading these documents gave me a lot of ideas for future scenarios. And so in Arctic Rising, I had a novel that was set in the polar north and looked at the geopolitics of it from the point of view of kind of like a techno-thriller spy novel. And for Hurricane Fever, I wanted to step that up and play with the techno-thriller elements even more. So we kind of have like a Caribbean James Bond going around the Caribbean and doing some of those, having some of those great adventures while also trying to navigate this sort of treacherous future that we're building for ourselves.
And really an authentic voice because of your background growing up. Talk a little bit about how you were really able to bring some, not hands-on, but really first-hand experience, your early days growing up, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Grenada, stuff like that. Talk about that.
Yeah, I was born in Grenada and also spent my high school years in the U.S. and British Virgin Islands. So one of the things I was trying to do was bring the islands to the readers. And one of the things I find frustrating about the Bond movies is that I really love them, but they always treat the islands that I came from as this sort of exotic tourist destination. Don't get me wrong, we've been kind of promoting them as an exotic tourist destination for a long time. People go to the beaches are beautiful. But there's so much more that exists down there in the islands. And so I wanted to bring some of that out in these books. And the way in which Bond mythology always frustrates me is that, people come in and it's a backdrop. The islands are just a backdrop. And I wanted the islands to live and breathe, and I wanted
really feel the culture.
Exactly. I wanted them to live, breathe, and be a part of the story in a bigger way, while also still having that fun, big adventure, great villains and that sort of thing. And then also, play with some of the far future scenarios that I've been doing for the past, 2 books. So that all kind of came together in Hurricane Fever.
Now, you're known for hard sci-fi and the Crystal Rain series and the Halo Protocol. And then when you jump into these novels that are, some people want to, speculative fiction, or they'll want to title it like that. How do you go in with a different mindset? Is there a little different way of writing these, or is it all the same process?
In some ways, it's all the same process, but these novels are near future, so they're definitely a lot more, this could happen in them. So I spent a lot more time trying to pull back on the crazy ideas, the really out there science fiction stuff that kind of floats my boat, and really just kind of focus on scenarios that are kind of ripped from the headlines, or ripped from headlines that are about to happen. One of the things that pleases me most about them is now that these books have been out, I get a flood of emails from someone whenever something from the books happens that is related to real life. So if one of the things I talk about in the book is that one of the reasons in Arctic Rising, one of the things that has people excited, drilling companies excited, is the loss of Arctic ice. And so they have plans, already on paper to go up there and drill. And so every time they try and do something like that, they send an exploratory ship to drill in the Arctic North. I get emails from people that are like, look at this headline. They're doing just what you described in the book. In some ways it makes me look like I'm a lot cleverer than I really am, because I'm just kind of, looking just one step ahead, trying to skate to where the puck is. On the other hand, it is very validating to get those emails and see these things kind of happen as I write them.
Well, one thing I find interesting is that in our past conversations, we discussed a lot about how many websites you're on, how much you were looking into the future science fiction to make speculation about, I remember talking about the gases on Venus or different things. And so I knew that you took your development of a series very seriously and you wanted to have the science behind it. Well, now we're right into it. And so these stories feel right now that they could be blowing up at any time. It's not 50 years from now, it might be 5 weeks from now, or 5 months or 5 years from now.
Yeah, no, it was very interesting to get people who are associated with some of the stuff that's going on in the Caribbean, kind of get back to me and say, hey, have people been talking to you? How did you forecast these things? And I go, it's just research. No one's spilling anything sensitive to me.
Now, for the people at home watching, the book's gotten incredible reviews so far. But for somebody that's not familiar, hasn't seen you on my show in the past, let's give them a little bit of a synopsis of Hurricane Fever. Give them the first 30 pages, the first 20 pages in a bubble.
So, retired spy Prudence Jones, known to his friends as Rue, has gotten a nice catamaran, is living a nice life in the Caribbean, and has adopted his nephew after their parents were killed in a hurricane. And one day he gets a message from a friend of his, and the message is the sort of thing that says, if you get this message, I'm dead, and here's what you need to do to try and solve what has happened to me, and here's some information I've been researching and finding and getting from the bad guys that you need to pass on and do something with. And to honor his dead friend, he gets pulled back into the game, and recovering this information causes ripples and consequences on down the line as they begin to unpack this villain's plan to cause chaos and trouble. One of the fun things about writing this novel, and that's the launch, but one of the fun things about writing it, you talk about research, I got to go down to Barbados, and they have this really cool aspect of old space history there, which is that Barbados and the U.S. Army and a researcher from Canada had all gotten together back in the I think 50s and 60s, before NASA was created, to build a giant gun to shoot satellites into orbit. They did the math, they figured it out that it was worth doing. It's called the HARP project. I had no idea growing up in Grenada, which is just across the way from Barbados, that before I was even born, they were trying to launch tiny little satellites into orbit from Barbados.
How cool, yeah.
Yeah, and the program got shut down when NASA was created because NASA took charge of everything, all space access projects, and they went with rockets, the Wernher von Braun approach, instead of the Jules Verne cannon approach. But as I researched this and I found this interesting little side note of Caribbean history and space history, I had to bring them together for the novel. And so, one of the things the villain is doing is he has plans for the gun, which they've built a 2.0 version of.
The perfect weapon.
The perfect weapon. Well, you look at that. Bond villains always have crazy weapons. And the moment I went down to Barbados and I walked around the ruins of this abandoned original project, I just walked around it and just thought, you have to put this in a book. A villain has to take it over. It has to be used for nefarious purposes. And it's also just wild. It's just a set piece. So these are the things the novel circles around.
Fantastic. I know the folks at home are really going to enjoy it. We always get such positive feedback when you're on the show and positive feedback about your books. I want to switch gears for a second and talk about conventions. That's how you and I first met.
Yeah.
And now we've stayed in touch about 8 or 9 years now, so at least 7 or 8. But something I wanted to bring up is we've kind of had this discussion off air before about genre writing, and now this is more of a techno thriller, but it goes with the genre writing. When I go to horror conventions, science fiction conventions, or what we're at today, GenreCon in Livonia, it seems to me that when I get to meet writers, they're very enthusiastic about the fact that if you are a genre writer, you get an opportunity to meet your fans in a face-to-face situation, and except for an occasional weird situation, it's a really great experience. And so for being at something like this, is it feedback, especially when you're writing about scientific things and technical things? Does that help in your writing sometimes? Do you get, I work for NASA and I'm an analyst of this and I'd like to tell you about this. Do you get a lot of that? Because you literally go all over the world to promote your books, literally all over the world. And do you get a lot of that? Are you meeting interesting people that help?
Yeah, you do meet interesting people that help. One of the plot points in Arctic Rising came from a discussion I had with someone who's a physicist. And, Jeff Landis was a fellow author who I happened to attend a presentation. He was giving a presentation about the atmosphere of Venus and how you could actually build a floating city that doesn't need any fancy inventions. You can actually build a floating city with what we know about math and physics that would work in the upper atmosphere of Venus. And you go and you meet people and you go to different places and people will tell you interesting things, and that is all stuff that you can come back to and use in your fiction. I was just recently in Bermuda and wandering around the island, and some people gave me some tours, and some taxi drivers would talk to me about the history of the island. And immediately, you just find interesting things that you latch onto and note down for later, because it's all grist for the mill, really.
Excellent. I've always been amazed. I keep up with you via your Facebook and via your website, and you're traveling a lot, so I was always interested in that. But I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up Crystal Rain. It's one of my all-time favorites, and I'm just super pleased to learn that you are going to be relaunching this, and so kind of for a new generation, but maybe people didn't get on board the first time around. And all three of the books are going to be are now going to be available. And there's also a fourth book available that you can get for your e-reader.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that a little bit.
So, Crystal Rain and my Xenowealth series launched in 2006. So, seems like forever and yesterday.
Yes.
The interesting thing is that, they've been only available as ebooks for a while now. So you can only get the paperback or the hardcover. And Tor has just decided to reissue the set in trade paperback. So, the $14.95 edition. And somewhere between a mass market and a hardcover. So it'll be in bookstores again. We've got new covers, and the ebooks now have the new covers. And starting this January, they'll be launching them one every 2 months until they're all out. And it's space adventure doesn't ever go out of style, really. And these are very, very big idea, outer space battles. Dire straits, big,
Everything from pirates to grand intergalactic battle, incredible stuff.
Big stakes, and just a lot of fun and adventure and action. And so for me, I'm really hoping that it is a chance for a new generation, like you said, to encounter these books out in the wild, and is a chance for people to maybe get a hold of them again in print if they found them in ebook for the first time. So it's just exciting to see them continue to have a life.
You and I have had a discussion before about how important a really nice cover is to selling a book.
It's key.
And when we first met, Crystal Rain had an incredible cover, and again, looking at the covers, they're very, very, very cool, and you mentioned off air how thrilled you are about it. Talk a little bit about the covers.
Oh, they're great covers. Well, one of the problems with a book is it doesn't have to have just a great cover. The art just can't be great. It also has to explain what the book is. One of the problems we had when the books first came out is that we had a fantastic artist. The art from the first books are on my walls, but they're done by a major fantasy illustrator. And so a lot of fantasy people recognized the art and thought it was a fantasy novel, but it's not. It's science fiction. A lot of science fiction people saw it and thought, that's a fantasy novel. So we had great art, but not a lot of people were picking it up who were the right readers. It was really hard to sell it to the SF readers. So with these new packages, it's science fictional art. We've got these gorgeous, sort of planetary pieces on the front, and they look fantastic. They sell the idea of what the book is, and they look similar to the other kinds of novels that are also doing this. So I'm hoping that this also helps us reach out a little bit from my core audience and find, a new readership. And I think the packaging was just spot on for this reissue.
Well, I hope a whole new level, because every 2 years it seems people, if it's 2 years old, they forget about it.
Yeah.
And I'm very passionate about those novels. I pass them on to friends.
Thank you.
The copies I have been read by 8, 9, 10 different people because I'm so passionately like it.
People who do that are absolutely the key to any success we have as an author.
I'm realizing that we're just about out of time. I want to remind folks that we had in-depth interviews about each of those novels that came out in the series. Crystal Rain in particular, we discussed to death and had a real fun time. One of the first interviews we ever did. So check that out on the Cult Pop website. I want you, before we close, to have the opportunity to tell people where they can find you now in this media world. There's ever, from Facebook to websites to Twitter, where can people find you now?
www.tobiasbuckell.com is that's the place where I dwell, and then I hang out on Twitter as well, and you can find me as Tobias Buckell. I've withdrawn from Facebook and other social venues just to focus my time, but the website's where it's at. You can sign up for the newsletter. It tells you whenever there's a new book out. I don't spam, and that's kind of where all the action is.
Well, Tobias, I'm so pleased that we were able to catch up again. You sincerely are one of my favorite guests. I always have a good time both during the interview and after talking with you. I wish you continued success and look forward to having you on in 2015.
Thank you, man. Really appreciate it.
Stay tuned for more Cult Pop. With me now is our wonderful friend Sherry Priest, who was kind enough to join us today to talk about a wonderful book, Maplecroft. I absolutely just loved it. You know, I love all your works, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk real quick while we had this opportunity. Tell the folks at home about Maplecroft and why they should buy it.
Okay. Well, first of all, it's awesome. I mean, no, I'm very, very excited about it. I've kind of been doing the same genre and the same stuff for about the last 4 or 5 years, and it's been wonderful and good to me, but it was time to try something else for a little bit and kind of go back to my roots. And the first book that frightened me that I ever truly loved was Dracula. And you don't really see a lot of 19th century epistolary novels running around anymore, and I thought now's the time. So the desire to do that kind of collided with, I was going down this an internet rabbit hole of research, as you do once in a while, and I came across the transcripts of the Lizzie Borden trial, and it was so much weirder than a nursery rhyme would have you to believe. There are a lot of strange little things about it that kind of aren't common knowledge anymore. At the time, I'm sure it was sensational and whatever, but there were a lot of really strange things about it, and the more I got thinking about it, the more I'm like, well, let's see, it's a New England seaside town, and there's all this weird stuff going on in the background, and what this trial needs is fish people, basically. we need some fish people. So basically, the high pitch is that this is a 19th century epistolary novel that's a love letter to Dracula via Lovecraft, and the low pitch is that it's Lizzie Borden fighting Cthulhu with an axe. And it was just so much fun, and it's not an alternate history of the trial or anything like that. This is basically what happens after, with fish people. In my version of events, basically, she did in fact kill her parents, but I mean, they were turning into Lovecraftian zombies and were trying to kill her, so self-defense. And I sometimes do, I bring a bunch of real characters into it, real people into it as characters. And I think probably the most interesting thing about the trial for me was how apparently, for some time before the murders, the family had been complaining that they were being poisoned. They were all confident somebody was trying to poison them, and they were getting sick. And they even sent food samples off to a university to see if they could figure out what was wrong with them. And apparently, in the middle of the night, their physician lived basically across the street from them, the doctor of whatever. And in the middle of the night, basically, Abigail Borden knocks on his door and says, you have to help us. Someone is trying to kill us. And by this point, it's been like 2 years of listening to these hypochondriacs complaining about somebody trying to kill them, and he basically tells her, go home. You're fine. Go home. And the next morning, she and her husband are found brutally hacked to death, and so forth and so on.
Should have listened.
Should have listened. He was a real person. His name was Seabury Bowden, I think, but Bowden's a little close to Borden, so I named him Owen Seabury. And he's in this. And after she was acquitted, she and her sister inherited the family fortune, and they were quite wealthy. But they didn't leave. They stayed in town, and they bought this huge Queen Anne Victorian on the other end of town called Maplecroft. And they basically lived out their days there as secret, quiet little ladies. Sort of, because enter Nance O'Neill, who was an actress and on stage and silent films back at the time, and she really liked big parties, and she really liked Lizzie Borden. And there were a lot of rumors about, you know, what are they doing at Maplecroft? There's witchcraft and big parties and lesbianism. Lesbianism was probably actually correct. There's, but she was, the real scandal in some regards is how much younger she was. This woman was like 19, 20 years old, and Lizzie was in her late 30s, you know, and carrying on obscenely, throwing these wild parties. And her older sister, Emma, didn't approve of any of it and eventually moved out in a huff. You know, but I thought it would be interesting. Like, well, all right. Well, here's your Mina, here's your Arthur, here's your Lucy, here's all of most of the archetypes are really in place, and it just seemed like such an. The idea snagged me, I think, back in 2008, and I had been fiddling with it in the back of my head, kind of playing with notes here and there, and kept thinking, I'm going to pull something together one of these days, and finally it clicked. And I'm just so glad that somebody took a chance on it, because it is a weird little project, but I'm so proud of it, I can hardly see straight.
Well, Sherry, you're obviously so passionate about it, and it's an incredible work. Now you're working with a new publisher, so is this is a new group for you? Do you feel that it's a standalone, or do you want to do more?
There's going to be one after. We haven't quite settled on a title yet. I've been knocking a couple around. I had a really great title, and then I realized it'd be a better title for another project I have down the pike. So we're using it for that instead. There is going to be a follow-up to it next year. And it will feature Lizzie and at least one of the other characters as well. Basically, there are a series of very strange axe murders in Alabama about 10 or 15 years after the Lizzie Borden case itself. So she's going to be drawn into that in some regard. And I don't know. I've done the Victorian stuff for so long, and this is later Victorian and 20th century even for the follow-up. But it's almost more challenging because it's so much nearer, and there's so many things that you don't realize we actually had back then, and you keep kind of tripping over yourself to keep it from sounding too modern, even as it's a different challenge, and I had so much fun with it, and the editor has been amazing. And apparently one of the other editors in the office is cousins with the people who actually own the Lizzie Borden Bed and Breakfast.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, it's fate. It is fate that you have picked up this book.
Well, I'm so happy for you, because I think it's cool that you can't really be pigeonholed into one. You branch off into so many different things that it's going to be impossible for somebody to say, yeah, and which is really great.
I hope it's all weird and spooky.
Sherry, talking about not being able to be pigeonholed, you kind of went off and did something a couple of years ago, and I didn't really get a chance to talk to you about the wild cards.
Yes.
You got to put your fingerprint on kind of that universe. Talk a little bit about that.
Oh my gosh, that was such a privilege, you know, and working with so many great people, and George R. R. Martin being the King George in charge of all of the wild cards things. And basically, I got a package in the mail from him one day that was a copy of one of the new books. Tor has been releasing some new wild cards books and is re-releasing the old ones. The franchise has been running for nearly 30 years. And a letter that basically said, I'm looking for some younger blood, and I've heard that you're interested in the series, and would you like to audition to be part of it? Basically, you propose characters and that kind of thing. And he didn't actually include any contact information in the email. I guess he figured if I wanted it bad enough, I'd find him, and I did. and I was just so excited to be part of it. And I pitched him the interstitial story, the interstitial mystery for one called Fort Freak. And at first he said, just no, don't do this. We use the old guard for these guys who really know the lore. And I'm like, no, I have a really good idea. What would make this not suck? And he was like, I don't know, maybe if you did this and this and this. So I redid it and I handed it back to him, and he was like, this is less bad. I was like, oh, no, I'm gonna melt this glacier, you know. And so gradually, like on the 5th or 6th pitch, he was finally like, just stop, we're gonna use it. And it was like learning at the feet of the master. It was amazing. And so that's basically a New York cop is a few months from retirement, and there's this one last case that has haunted him all these years, and that he gets to kind of wrap up before he leaves. And I haven't been as active in it for years just because I've had so many other projects kind of floating at once. But I did do a novelette for Tor.com called The Button Man and the Murder Tree, Chicago, 1979. And it's about one of the characters from Fort Freak. And it's noir. It's you know, Joker noir, basically. And it's about a hitman and how he ends up on the bad end of things, and why he ends up leaving Chicago and ending up in New York. So,
real quick, we don't have as much time as we normally do, but can you talk about the difference between working for somebody else's kind of universe as compared to creating your own? Do you like that, or are there?
I
do you enjoy that? You know, you're kind of just stepping in and going
well,
with it.
There's almost something easier about it because you're kind of not responsible for it, really. I mean, just if George doesn't like it, he tells you he doesn't like it and tells you to do something else, so you do something else. and he's the final arbiter of it. When there's only one person you have to please, that's really, really helpful. I took a brief jaunt into video games and I worked at EA kind of on a contract basis for the better part of a year. And when there's a hierarchy of 8 or 9 people you got to please, it's just, you know, nailing Jello to the wall. It's just, it's impossible. But when it's just George on top, and he says, I don't like this, you should do this instead, well, that's easier. It's like, I can do that and it'll be fine. So when it's your own when it's your own sandbox, then it's your own sandbox. You can do whatever you want. But that's almost sometimes paralyzing. Like, well, now I don't know what to do with this. And you can bounce it off an editor. You have people you can talk to. But when George is just like, no, don't do that, do this. Thank you. Yes, I will go do that. Right. And it's probably better than what I was going to do anyway.
That you might normally.
Oh yeah.
An editor might be afraid to. That's I was just kind of
like the last line in Fort Freak. He was like, I think this isn't quite strong enough, and he was completely right. I knew it was weak. He's like, maybe something like this or this or that. The first thing was like 50 times better than anything I could have pulled out of my butt. So I was like, I'm just going to use that first.
I'll just take that.
I'll just take that. It's fine. But it was fantastic.
Well, you know, I absolutely adore all the stuff you do. I love having you on the show.
Well, I love being here.
I want you to be able to, as usual, let people know about your website so they can learn more about you, learn more about your books, where to find them and whatnot. So tell people at home about the website.
It's easy peasy. I got a central hub, sherrypriest.com. It also has links to Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, all of that exciting stuff. I am really, really easy to find on the internet.
Excellent. Well, Sherry, as always, I appreciate you being on the show. You know that you've always got a home here. We will help support anything you want to put out there. So thank you so much for being on today. That wraps up another Cult Pop. I hope you enjoyed the show as much as we enjoy bringing it to you. As always, you can check out our back episodes at the website, www.cultpop.com. And especially this episode is very relevant because both Tobias and Sherry have been on numerous times. So go to the website and you can check out the backlog of episodes and see when they discuss some of their previous novels. They've been great guests in the past, and I think you'll really enjoy those also. Thanks as always for watching the show. Thanks for always for going to the website. We appreciate you watching. We'll see you next time.